Okay, quick skeleton demo. This is on an 18 by 24 inch piece of paper, so it's very large. And you can see I have my proportion lines right here. I'll just show you the way I would start. I would start by drawing my top proportion line, then my bottom proportion line. I would eyeball where the middle is like this, and I would check with my hands. That is about one like this, and this is about the same. Okay, so I start by drawing top, bottom, and midline. This is just an example again over here, which I already drew, so I'm just giving you a way to start. Basically top, bottom, midline. Next thing I'm going to do is divide this section up. So I'm going to eyeball where I think it is. I'm going to measure with my fingers. It needs to come down a little bit. So again, that would be a 4. So I'd have 1, 2, 3, 4. These are 4 sections. This top line here is for the top of the cranium. Midline goes across the rib cage. Middle of the rib cage. On the body, it's across the pectoral muscles. The midline of the entire body, right here, M, goes across the pelvis, right above the pubic arch, right here. Okay, this is the iliac crest. This is our pelvis, and this is the top of the pubic bone right here. So that is the midpoint. On the 3/4 of the way down, 1, 2, 3, 4, this line goes across the patellas. So again, this is the femur. This is the longest bone in our body, the femur. Tibia is the largest bone in the lower leg. The fibula is the other bone, which I hadn't drawn on this side. It would be coming on the interior side of the leg like this. So once I do that, then I have to divide it one more time. So I'm going to half this again, and that's going to be the size of my head. Half this again, half this again, and half this again. And I'm going to just check really quickly with my fingers again. Whoops, I keep hitting this. I'm going to check with my fingers again just to make sure they are approximately the same size. I can see this one's a little bit bigger, so I'm going to shift this up just a tiny bit and this down just a tiny bit. Okay, so now once I have this, the first thing I'm going to do is draw the head, and I'm looking at a photograph of a skeleton, right? So the first thing I would do is draw the head. This one was a little bit of a 3/4 view. I'll do kind of a front view. So I would draw the cranium, and I'm just going to sketch it in first just to get the proportions, and then the mandible. My cranium's just a little bit large, so I'm going to have to make it a little bit smaller, a little too wide. And my mandible. And it flattens out here, right? After that, I'd figure out the angle of the shoulders. If it's facing me, it'd probably be a horizontal like this. So again, I would give myself, there'd be a neck right through here. Shoulder line like this. If I wanted to measure how wide it is across here, I know it's 2 heads. So I would measure from the top of my paper to the mandible. This is the midpoint of the body right here. That's where the sternum's going to go. And there's 1 head, so that's where the shoulder should end. There's 2 heads, that's where the other shoulder should end. Then I would kind of draw in the clavicles. Give myself a sense of where the sternum is. Okay, rib cage. Start laying my rib cage in. I know, actually before I put my rib cage in, I know that basically my pelvis has to go right here because this is the midpoint, right? Over here. So I would just roughly get it in the shape of the pelvis, and I would also measure how wide my pelvis was compared to my shoulders. So it is usually more narrow. It's about equal with the rib cage. Sometimes with women it's a little wider, with men it's a little more narrow. So if I brought these lines down, I could also measure it and compare it to how many heads it is across if I'm citing it in my book. So then again, I'm going to just start loosely defining these basic shapes just to get my proportions. Pivot points, figure out where the elbow usually hits on the body. It's usually a little lower than our waist, which would be about here. So this is going to be about where the elbow is. Get my basic shape of my pelvis in. It's almost like a butterfly shape. So I'm just doing a sketch here. This was too far out, so I'm going to bring this shoulder in and give myself a sense of where the head of the humerus would go, where the elbow would go. Then I'm going to start putting in my femur, right? And so this is a area that dips in on the pelvis. I give myself, again, simple shapes just to kind of figure out. Humerus on the skeleton oftentimes kind of comes in at an angle. This is where my patella is going to go. Again, head of the femur, come down, patella, lower legs. This bottom line is not the toe line, toes go past, it's the heel line, where you use the same thing for the figure. So again, I would get the head of my tibia kind of coming down here and give myself a sense of the heel. If a foot's coming out towards me, I give myself an arch line like this, and then the foot would kind of come out at an angle, and it would be shorter if it's coming out towards me. So you simplify forms. If the foot's kind of going to the side, same thing. This is kind of the heel line. This would be the end of the bones. Heel line, the foot would kind of, there's the arch. The foot's going to come out in a plane this direction. So this is how we do simplified forms for feet and also hands. So the same with this. If I came down and I don't actually have my bone shapes yet, I just have proportions and directions. Our fingers usually hit about mid-thigh, so it's probably going to go about right here. Of course, with the skeletons, they're sometimes longer because they're not fit up into our bones quite the same way when they're all wired together. But this is about where the hands would hit. Our hands are the same size as our face. So I measure this. I know that hand has to be about that tall, so that's about where the wrist bone would start. For hands, these are carpals. Metacarpals are the wrist. Metacarpals are the bones of the hand. Again, I'm just going to kind of give myself a plane. And phalanges for the fingers. Same on this side. I'm going to give myself the wrist. These are the carpals, metacarpals, phalanges. With the foot, these are tarsals. And the next bones are metatarsals that come down, and then phalanges at the end for the toes, or phalanx. So that's just basically, I forgot to get the curve of my spine in. Since I have a midline, instead of this one was 3/4, my spine would just kind of be right down the middle. It gets wider as it comes down. I'd see it through the spine. So there's my beginning structural layout. I've got all the proportions. Now I would go in, I would look at the skeleton, and I would start to actually get my bone shapes, right? Like I did here. The actual shapes of the bones that I'm seeing. And then afterwards I would add a little shading to it to make it have some volume. But first I'm just going to sketch through it all and erase if I have things off and try and get the actual bone shapes. Okay? I hope that helps.